Welcome to the debate. Today we are undertaking a pretty rigorous examination of two of the most popular yet diametrically opposed dietary paradigms in modern nutritional science. On one side, we have the vegan diet, which is characteristically plant-based, high carbohydrate, and very low fat. And on the other side, we have the ketogenic diet, which is predominantly animal-based, extremely high fat, and very low carbohydrate.
Right. And I think it's important to say right up front that we are explicitly setting aside the cultural noise and the lifestyle dogmas that usually surround these ways of eating. We really want to focus purely on the clinical data today. So let's frame the central question clearly. When evaluated through the lens of metabolic function, immunological impact, and long-term sustainability, which diet is actually healthier for the human body?
Exactly. And to answer that, this discussion is strictly grounded in recent clinical trials, multi-omics analyses, and systematic reviews that directly compare these two dietary interventions. I will be representing the position that the vegan diet is the superior choice, largely due to its profound cardiovascular protection, sustainable metabolic benefits, and its enhancement of innate immunity.
And I'll be representing the position that the ketogenic diet is the healthier, more powerful therapeutic tool due to its frankly unparalleled ability to reverse insulin resistance, suppress appetite, and upregulate adaptive immunity.
Right. So let me begin by clearly articulating why a whole food, plant-based vegan diet offers the safest, most evidence-backed path to long-term human health. When we look at the clinical data, particularly these large-scale systematic reviews tracking thousands of people over decades, the cardiovascular benefits of eliminating animal products they're simply undeniable. Vegans experience a 15% relative risk reduction in cardiovascular disease incidence and an 8% reduction in cardiovascular mortality.
But we have to ask what is actually driving that reduction, right?
Well, it is largely driven by lipids. This dietary pattern naturally and reliably lowers LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, sometimes by up to 44% compared to omnivores. It also significantly reduces blood pressure. Furthermore, it promotes sustainable weight loss without the psychological burden of strict calorie counting. Because plant foods have lower caloric density and inherently high fiber content, individuals can just eat to satiety. They naturally maintain an energy deficit simply because it is incredibly difficult to overeat broccoli, lentils, and oats. It aligns perfectly with our physiological need for fiber, antioxidants, and sustained cardiovascular protection.
I hear that, but I come at it from a very different way. The ketogenic diet is not just another macronutrient ratio where we're tweaking fats and carbs. It fundamentally and beneficially reprograms human metabolism. By restricting carbohydrates to roughly 5 to 10% of daily caloric intake, you force a metabolic switch. It's a lot like a hybrid car switching from its gas engine to its electric battery. The body transitions from utilizing glucose as its primary fuel source to utilizing fatty acids in ketone bodies, particularly beta-hydroxybutyrate, or BHB.
But that metabolic switch comes at a cost, which we will certainly get into.
I would argue the clinical evidence shows the benefit vastly outweighs any perceived cost. The state of nutritional ketosis provides rapid weight loss and vastly superior glycemic control. It drastically lowers HbA1c, which, for our listeners, is the measure of your average blood sugar levels over a 3-month period. It lowers that HbA1c in ways that plant-based diets simply struggle to match, unless the patient is severely restricting calories. But beyond just controlling glucose, BHB isn't just a fuel. It acts as a powerful signaling molecule that directly inhibits the NLRP3 inflammasome.
We should probably explain what that inflammasome actually is.
Absolutely. You can think of the NLRP3 inflammasome as a cellular fire alarm that triggers chronic inflammation throughout the body. Ketones essentially walk over and pull the battery out of that alarm, providing potent systemic anti-inflammatory effects. And perhaps most importantly, ketosis regulates hunger hormones naturally, allowing people to eat to absolute satiety while effortlessly maintaining a caloric deficit.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. And I think that brings us perfectly to the cardiovascular risks associated with keto versus the glycemic control you just mentioned. I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because the lipid profile alterations seen on a ketogenic diet present a severe cardiovascular risk that we really just cannot ignore in good conscience.
You're referring to the LDL spikes.
Exactly. The data clearly shows that adopting a ketogenic diet frequently leads to a substantial, dangerous increase in LDL cholesterol. Clinical trials indicate it effectively doubles the risk of developing severe high cholesterol, which we define as an LDL over 190 milligrams per deciliter. That is a level where cardiologists immediately prescribe medication. Furthermore, there is emerging evidence linking these very low carbohydrate, high animal fat diets to arterial stiffening. We measure this through something called pulse wave velocity, literally how fast the blood pressure wave moves through your arteries. Faster means stiffer. And keto often makes those arteries stiffer, increasing the risk of atrial fibrillation.
Look, I think we need to look at the broader context of what is happening in the blood.
But contrast that with the vegan diet first. The vegan diet reliably drops LDL cholesterol, improves that pulse wave velocity so arteries stay flexible, and actually reduces the risk of type 2 diabetes by 23% through improved insulin sensitivity and reduced lipotoxicity. You don't need to flood the bloodstream with saturated fat to achieve metabolic control.
That's a compelling argument, it is. But have you considered that looking exclusively at LDL cholesterol provides an incredibly incomplete picture of cardiometabolic risk? The lipid argument against the ketogenic diet routinely overlooks the broader metabolic improvements. When patients enter nutritional ketosis, we see heavy improvements in other vital markers. Yes, LDL might go up in some patients, but keto consistently and dramatically lowers triglycerides, the fat actually circulating in your blood. It reliably increases HDL cholesterol, the protective kind, and most crucially, it drastically reduces fasting insulin.
I agree, insulin is important, but
It is the root driver. We know that hyperinsulinemia, having too much insulin chronically pumping through your system, is the fundamental engine of metabolic syndrome. The vegan diet, with its inherently high carbohydrate load, often up to 75% of total calories, can be profoundly suboptimal for individuals who are already suffering from severe insulin resistance. Their bodies simply cannot process carbohydrates anymore. The data demonstrates that the ketogenic diet reduces HbA1c by an average of 1.07% and in some targeted trials up to 3.3%. This level of glycemic control is so profound that patients are frequently able to completely discontinue their anti-diabetic medications within weeks. That is true disease reversal, not just management.
I see why you think that. But let me give you a different perspective on that idea of disease reversal. The vegan diet also allows patients to discontinue anti-diabetic medications, but it does so by treating the actual root cause of insulin resistance, not just avoiding the trigger.
What do you define as the root cause, if not carbohydrates?
Intramyocellular lipids. Put simply, this is fat buildup inside the muscle cells. Think of your muscle cell's insulin receptor like a lock, and insulin is the key that opens the door to let sugar out of the blood and into the cell. A high-fat diet gums up that lock with microscopic fat droplets. We call that lipotoxicity. When you consume a low-fat vegan diet, you stop stuffing gum in the lock. Insulin sensitivity improves remarkably, allowing the body to process carbohydrates efficiently again. It's a fundamental healing of the metabolic machinery, rather than a mere workaround where you just stop eating carbs to hide the fact that your metabolism is broken.
I hear you, but healing the metabolic machinery is exactly what the ketogenic diet accomplishes, just through a different bioenergetic pathway. And if we're looking at what actually works for people day to day, we can't ignore bioenergetics and satiety. A diet only works if you can stick to it without starving, which leads us to weight loss mechanisms. The ketogenic diet demonstrates absolute bioenergetic superiority when it comes to weight loss. The initial weight loss is incredibly rapid.
Right, but let's be honest about what that initial weight loss actually is. That's primarily transient water loss.
I will readily acknowledge that a portion of the initial drop is the depletion of hepatic and muscular glycogen, the stored carbohydrates in your liver and muscles. And yes, you shed roughly 1,500 grams of water for every 500 grams of glycogen lost. But the downstream effects on body composition, once you are fat adapted, are undeniable. More importantly, we have to look at the hormonal appetite suppression.
You're referring to the ghrelin suppression.
Exactly. High circulating levels of BHB, those ketones we talked about, actively suppress ghrelin, which is the primary hunger hormone screaming at your brain to eat. Simultaneously, it increases satiety hormones like GLP-1 and CCK. This is the exact same pathway that modern weight loss drugs target, but keto does it endogenously, for free. This is why people on keto don't feel starved. Conversely, the literature points out that vegan diets can sometimes decrease satiety due to rapid gastric emptying. Low-fat, high-carbohydrate meals move through the stomach quickly, causing blood sugar to spike and crash, leading people to struggle with cravings and ultimately default back to old unhealthy eating habits.
I really want to push back on the idea that vegan diets leave people hungry, because the clinical reality paints a very different picture. The rapid initial weight loss on keto, as you admitted, is mostly water. It creates a psychological illusion of massive fat loss that isn't actually happening at that accelerated rate. Furthermore, clinical studies tracking these diets side by side over a year or more show that long-term fat loss between the two is highly comparable. The difference is what happens when adherence wavers.
Well, adherence is difficult on any diet. True, but with keto, because those glycogen stores refill the moment you eat a piece of bread, the water weight returns immediately upon stopping the diet, which is incredibly demoralizing for the patient. I also have grave concerns about the restrictiveness of keto and its lack of dietary fiber. By eliminating whole grains, legumes, and most fruits, you drastically reduce fiber intake. This frequently causes severe constipation, but worse than that, it fundamentally starves and alters the gut microbiome in ways that can potentially increase the risk of colon cancer over time. The vegan diet, by contrast, naturally and easily achieves a sustainable caloric deficit due to the sheer volume of the food.
But relying on volume for satiety is just stretching the stomach mechanically?
And volume eating is a highly effective, evolutionarily appropriate mechanism for satiety. Stretch receptors in the stomach send powerful signals to the brain that you are full. It leads to sustained structural body mass reduction while keeping the gastrointestinal tract perfectly healthy and the microbiome diverse.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. The idea that keto destroys the microbiome or universally causes constipation completely ignores how a well-formulated ketogenic diet is actually constructed. It is not exclusively plates of bacon and sticks of butter. A proper clinical keto diet relies heavily on non-starchy vegetables, avocados, nuts, and seeds, which provide ample, high-quality fiber. And that's for sustainability. Hunger is the ultimate enemy of any weight loss intervention. A diet that naturally suppresses the hunger hormone through ketone production is inherently more sustainable for an obese individual battling constant food noise than a diet that relies on stomach distension from eating pounds of cabbage.
Well, the evolutionary appropriateness of plant matter becomes even more evident when we look at the multi-omics data, specifically regarding immune response and nutritional adequacy. I'm thinking of the fascinating, highly controlled 2-week crossover study recently conducted by the NIH.
Oh, the one where they locked participants in a metabolic ward?
Exactly. They put people in a metabolic ward, meaning they controlled and measured every single calorie and nutrient entering and exiting their bodies, completely isolating their dietary variables. They then ran a multi-omics analysis, which means they looked at how the diets affected the genome, the proteins, and the metabolism all at once. The data revealed that the vegan diet significantly upregulates the innate immune system.
And we should clarify for the audience that the innate immune system is our body's general first line of defense.
Right. Think of it like a generic security alarm for the whole house. It robustly enhanced antiviral pathways and upregulated type 1 interferon responses, which protect us against viruses. Furthermore, the vegan diet promoted red blood cell-linked pathways, including heme metabolism, meaning it supported optimal blood health. Contrast this with the nutritional gaps inherent to the ketogenic diet. Keto severely limits intake of essential nutrients like magnesium, potassium, and selenium. In fact, severe selenium deficiency on keto has been linked to Keshan disease, a dangerous type of cardiomyopathy, not to mention the well-documented side effect of kidney stones due to hypercalciuria, which is when the body excretes excess calcium into the urine because of the high acid load of animal protein.
I am so glad you brought up that exact NIH Metabolic Ward study, because it is a beautifully designed trial, but I actually read the multi-omics data completely differently than you did. While the vegan diet stimulated the innate, general immune response, the ketogenic diet uniquely upregulated adaptive immunity.
Which is the more specific immune response.
Exactly. If innate immunity is the generic house alarm, adaptive immunity is the highly trained SWAT team that targets specific intruders. We are talking about highly targeted, pathogen-specific defenses. The keto diet significantly upregulated T-cell activation, T-cell memory formation, and B-cell enrichment. Furthermore, the proteomic scope, meaning the changes in the proteins across the body, was much broader on the ketogenic diet. It wasn't just blood-centric like the vegan diet. The metabolic state of ketosis induced widespread systemic perturbations affecting proteins in the brain and the bone marrow. It is a whole-body metabolic upgrade. And since we are discussing nutritional adequacy and risks, we must rigorously critique the severe nutritional deficits inherent to a strict vegan diet.
I believe the literature shows vegan diets can be perfectly adequate when appropriately planned.
Let's look at these specific biochemical gaps of that planning, though. A strict vegan diet is inherently devoid of vitamin B12, which is absolutely critical for central nervous system function. Without meticulous supplementation, vegans face real risks of axonal demyelination. For our listeners, that is essentially when the protective insulation gets stripped off your nerve fibers, leading to severe, often irreversible neurological damage. Furthermore, plant-based diets critically lack bioavailable vitamin D3, heme iron, and crucial omega-3 fatty acids, specifically DHA and EPA.
Vegans can get omega-3s from flax seeds and walnuts in the form of ALA.
Yes, but the conversion rate of plant-based ALA into the crucial DHA and EPA that the brain actually uses is remarkably poor, often less than 5%. This lack of essential fatty acids, combined with poorer calcium absorption, correlates directly with the clinical data showing a significantly increased risk of bone fractures and lower bone mineral density in vegan populations. A diet that requires synthetic supplementation to prevent neurological decay and bone fractures simply cannot be categorized as the most optimal biological baseline for humans.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because I think it creates a massive false equivalency. Yes, a vegan diet requires a B12 supplement, a simple, inexpensive, and highly effective intervention. But a ketogenic diet requires constant medical monitoring to ensure you aren't developing severe dyslipidemia, arterial stiffening, or renal calculi, those kidney stones we talked about. We are comparing taking a daily vitamin with your breakfast to risking severe cardiometabolic endpoints that require pharmaceutical intervention.
I think characterizing keto as requiring constant pharmaceutical intervention is a bit of a stretch when it frequently eliminates the need for diabetes medication.
Fair, but looking back at the immune data you highlighted, while the keto diet may upregulate T cells and the adaptive immune system in the short term, we do not know if keeping the adaptive immune system constantly activated is a net positive over a 70 or 80-year lifespan. Chronic activation of highly targeted immune pathways can sometimes mirror autoimmune behavior, where the body starts attacking itself. The innate immune upregulation seen on the vegan diet, coupled with its massive reduction in inflammatory markers like hsCRP, paints a picture of a calm, protected, and highly functional physiological state, rather than one in constant high alert.
That is a compelling argument, but have you considered that the reduction in inflammation on keto is profoundly well documented at a molecular level? We discussed BHB directly blocking the NLLP3 inflammasome. That is a targeted mechanistic anti-inflammatory intervention that plant fibers simply can't replicate. And as for the dyslipidemia concern, many prominent lipidologists now argue that in the context of vastly reduced triglycerides, soaring HDL, and completely eliminated systemic inflammation, a rise in LDL cholesterol does not carry the same atherogenic risk as it does in a patient consuming a standard, highly processed Western diet. The metabolic context matters immensely. If your arteries aren't inflamed, the LDL doesn't have the same opportunity to penetrate the vessel wall and form a plaque.
The context certainly does matter, which is why we must look at the long-term epidemiological reality rather than just short-term mechanistic theories about LDL. Decades of observational data on plant-predominant populations, the so-called blue zones, consistently show remarkable longevity and minimal chronic disease. To summarize my position in light of our deep dive today, while the ketogenic diet certainly has very interesting short-term clinical applications, particularly for rapid glycemic control and targeted neurological conditions like epilepsy, the whole food vegan diet remains the most compelling, evidence-based paradigm for lifelong health. It provides unparalleled cardiovascular protection by keeping lipids low, robust support for our innate antiviral immunity, and a sustainable, structurally sound method for chronic disease prevention without the cardiovascular risks of high saturated fat intake.
And to summarize my position, the ketogenic diet is far more than a short-term weight loss tool or an epilepsy treatment. It is a profound metabolic therapy that fundamentally corrects the hyperinsulinemia driving modern chronic disease. By shifting the body to ketone metabolism, it controls appetite at a hormonal level, genuinely reverses insulin resistance rather than just masking it, and offers unique neuroprotective and adaptive immune benefits. Plant-based diets, while undoubtedly rich in certain antioxidants and fibers, simply cannot match the bioenergetic efficiency, the targeted anti-inflammatory signaling of BHB, or the absolute glycemic stability provided by a properly formulated ketogenic diet.
Well, despite our distinct interpretations of the clinical data and the underlying mechanisms, I believe we have arrived at a vital point of convergence today. Both the whole food vegan diet and a properly formulated ketogenic diet share one critical, non-negotiable commonality when executed correctly. They both demand the complete elimination of ultra-processed foods, refined grains, and added sugars.
I completely agree with you on that. Whether you were heavily restricting carbohydrates to induce ketosis or restricting animal products to maximize plant-based micronutrients, you're fundamentally abandoning the standard Western diet. That elimination of industrially processed, hyperpalatable food is a massive, life-saving upgrade for human physiology, regardless of which of these two paradigms you ultimately adopt.
It is truly remarkable to reflect on the fact that our macronutrient choices are not merely fuel to be burned, but fundamental biological signals. As the multiomics data from the NIH showed us, simply changing what we put on our plates can rapidly and radically remodel our immune profiles, our microbiome, and our metabolic pathways in as little as 2 weeks.
Absolutely. There is incredibly rich data in the source material we pulled from today, and I highly suggest there is much more to explore regarding how specific genetic backgrounds might favor one dietary approach over the other. We leave it to the listener to carefully weigh these profound metabolic trade-offs, consult with their healthcare team, and form their own conclusion based on their specific individual health requirements and biological context.
Thank you for joining us for this rigorous analysis. Until next time.